Greetings again, dear viewers. We are back to part 2 with Grace Ajode Jibril. Grace Ajode Jibril is an employment law expert with a consultancy in Washington, D.C. Grace went to the United States as a child with her family. Her family migrated to the United States, and she was like about maybe 11 or 10 years old. She has grown up there. She's very attached to Kenya, and she's an African. She loves Africa. And so she's giving us the analysis. She has just given us the analysis of how the elections went, the figures, and the facts. Now she's going to give us a historical background. Welcome back, Grace. Karibu.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you again for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, give us a historical background.
As we talked about in the other session, we were really discussing the matters of what the stats are looking like with the United States electorate. What we discussed some of the things that we like, we don't like. How does our African diaspora tie into this? But one of the things we always, or many of us don't know, is politics. You know, the history of American politics. I mean, it really, really gets very interesting when you take your time. Thank goodness for the internet. It gets really amazing. So one of the things that I want to break down is, you know, we talk about Donald Trump and emotions run so high when it comes to Donald Trump. But we've always looked at Donald Trump as a gentleman whose beginnings come from his father, and his father in the real estate business, and his father's wealth and how he grew into that wealth and the privileges that come with it. But one of the things we don't know, and I could just segue really quickly into an interesting story, is that, you know, there's a gentleman, let me just even bear with me. Let me even make a little bit more dramatic here. So when you look at the early years, there's a gentleman named John G. Trump. John G. Trump is the uncle of Donald Trump. When Trump was taking office, and when he will be taking office again this coming year, and I know everyone is so upset about it, one of the things he'll do is he may or may not raise his hand on the Bible. That's a big issue now. They're saying he may not because he chooses not to. But if he does, one of the things he'll say is, I, Donald John Trump. So Donald Trump is named after John G. Trump, or John George Trump, born August 21st, 1907, passed away February 21st, 1985. He was an American electrical engineer. But guess why I'm bringing this up? When you look at the early years of the Trump administration and the early years of America, really, when you see the distinct modern America, you see it being built beginning 1901, shortly after, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation, et cetera, et cetera. But what you find is that the story, as history has it, this is not just a story, but as history has it, you know, one of the, you know, the most prolific inventors that everyone across the board knows, whose car we drive, is Nikola Tesla, okay? Nikola Tesla was an extremely brilliant inventor and scientist and engineer. And we know a lot about his early engineering breakthroughs and some of the things that he invented that are still used to this day. But what we don't talk about is, after his middle age period, what happened to Nikola Tesla? Okay. Well, one of the more controversial topics relating to John G. Trump, and just to get into who he was, as we talked about his age, et cetera, he essentially was a professor at MIT from 1936 to 1985. He was a recipient of the National Medal of Science and a member of the National Academy of Engineering. Trump was noted for developing rotational radiation therapy, together with Robert J. Vandergoff, who developed one of the first actually million-volt X-ray generator. Well, there's an interesting background to that, guys, and I'm going to tie into all of this. One of the more controversial topics involving Nikola Tesla with regards to John G. Trump is what became of many of Tesla's technical and scientific papers after he died in 1943. Just before his death and at the height of World War II, he claimed that he had perfected his so-called death beam. There's this nuclear stuff. So Tesla had a book that he kept called Government, very close to him, and he had items in his safe. As he became poor, thanks to Edison, everybody who knows history knows that Edison perpetuated a defamatory campaign against Tesla, where Tesla ended up dying broke, essentially. Tesla lived in a hotel in New York for many, many, many years. The morning after Tesla's death, the morning after Tesla's death, his nephew, Sava Kosanovic, Tesla was Eastern European. He came to the hotel and hurried there to his uncle's room at the Hotel New Yorker. By the time he arrived, Tesla's body had already been removed, and so was the book, written Government, and about 30 of Tesla's critical boxes, and the safe was also empty with some of his most precious inventions.
Yeah.
Guess who was the first to arrive the night before when Tesla passed away? John G. Trump.
Wow.
And I start this story to give everybody an open picture that a lot of these guys who take up these political offices are people historically been connected with the U.S. government through family ties.
Yes.
Samuel Prescott Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Herbert Walker, George Herbert Walker Bush, and George Walker Bush. These are family members who have been in politics for many, 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 many years and have been part of systems and processes. For instance, George Herbert Walker Bush was CIA director.
Yes.
Later on, George Bush became president. Connections.
Yes.
Now, some of the notable families in the Washington, D.C. area, for instance, there was one called the Georgetown Set. Georgetown Set comprised of the Kennedy family. The Alsop brothers were prominent political journalists. They were key figures in the Georgetown community, and they pretty much implemented a lot of policies, and they worked very closely with the Bushes, et cetera, et cetera. The Graham family were the founders of the Washington Post. They all partied in Georgetown. Georgetown is the wealthiest community in Washington, D.C. People misconstrue Potomac as part of D.C. and Bethesda as part of D.C. Chevy Chase, but those are Maryland cities.
Yes.
See? So that's why they call it the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, because there's power and trillions of dollars flowing, personal monies, generational wealth. And those generational wealth are not just tying into business, they actually have factors and are involved in our politics. So we have to really remember that sometimes we vote, but sometimes your vote matters. Sometimes there are other factors that are tied into why people become president,
Yes.
So for instance, another key group of, the notable families are, Senator John Foster Dulles, which Dulles Airport, those of you who've ever flown into the DC area, have flown into Dulles Airport. Well, it's named after John Foster Dulles. He was a diplomat and was also a senator from New York. But a lot of us don't really talk or know about Allen Welsh Dulles. Allen Welsh Dulles was a director of CIA born 1893 to 1969. Why is Allen Welsh so important? Allen Welsh, of course, even he was present in Sarajevo. What is significant about Sarajevo? Sarajevo is significant in world history because in 1914, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand who was a key figure in politics at the time, was assassinated. Well, conspiracy theorists, here we go. What was Allen Welsh Dulles in his early 20s doing in Sarajevo?
Yeah, good question.
yeah, allegedly with some involvement with the U.S. government, even during World War One. He was in Sarajevo when the assassination took place. In World War II, Dulles was the director of the Office of Strategic Services at the time, or what we call the OSS in the U.S. here. This is
Oh,
before CIA, guys. This is
wow.
before FBI. We're talking about World War II, 1930s, that kind of thing. He gathered intelligence on German activities and plans and established contacts with resistance figures, German immigrants, and anti-Nazi intelligence. Of course, this is the guy. Of course, this is the guy that the president would appoint as one of the first CIA directors. Later, of course, we would hear about Herbert of Hoover and all these other guys, you know?
Yes.
So I'm just giving you guys an idea that the families in the DC area are extremely powerful. One of the things that after World War II that many of us don't know, after World War II, we've got many operations like Project Paperclip. There are a few other projects that were very secretive, whereby there was a race between Russia and the United States to acquire as many scientists as possible and military guys as possible. So that because they knew that either the gold that the Nazis had stolen and the critical documents relating to science, technologies the Nazis had, that they needed it in order to take advantage. So that's where the Cold War started. Pretty
Yes.
shortly after World War II, there was a race to get information from the Nazis. And the US, I think, brought about 1,600 scientists and about 1,000 military people from Nazi Germany, who were actually part of the Nazi party, to the US. Number one, to protect US interests, and of course, also to utilize some of their benefits. The creator and the guy, the gentleman who was responsible for us going to the moon, was a Nazi scientist. So the
Wow.
point I'm just trying to make here is these notable, yes, and Alan Welsh Dulles was part of some of these initiatives. And one of the things, the two presidents that are really crucial in all of this were President Harry S. Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower. So Harry S. Truman, 1945 to 1953, was right in there with in World War II, and Truman essentially was the first to essentially initiate the Central Intelligence Agency. They needed ways to spy on the Russians, undermine new youth wing Nazi organizations that had started to grow at the time in Germany, and essentially squash it. One of the things that people don't know was that Alan Welsh Dulles, the CIA director, was part of what they called Operation Sunrise, which is in 1945. Dulles played a central role in Operation Sunrise, the secret negotiations that led to the surrender of Germany. So again, we're looking at high-level people establishing foreign policy in the United States, and in that foreign policy, it ties into the presidencies. And I'm just giving you guys a picture that, yes, we look at the presidents of the United States as the key people. Oh, Trump is here, he'll make our lives much better, as most Kenyans are saying. What they do not understand is it's not just Trump. There are organizations within the US government that are extremely powerful. People refer to them as the deep state, but they are sometimes combined with the corporate America. Sometimes they're combined with long-standing relationships that are present, and a lot of them tie into old families. And when I talk about old families, it's not just, and this is just modern. We go way back. Like, for instance, the people who signed the Declaration of Independence were essentially George Washington. There were Ben Franklin, John Hancock, and Paul Revere. George Washington had what? Massive amounts of land and a slave population.
Yes.
Okay. So did Ben Franklin. And, and all of these guys were essentially, when they met in Pennsylvania to sign the Declaration of Independence, along with the other 56 delegates from the 13 colonies, one of the things that they were doing was they were pretty much putting up a position that, first of all, we are providing cotton to the North. Factories are growing, and the United States is is the richest country in the world.
Yes.
Or colony for the British at the time in the world, because of the cotton, tobacco, and what else was it? Cotton, tobacco, and coffee. Okay?
Yes.
So I think it was coffee. I may be wrong in terms
Tea?
of
What
coffee, but
about
cotton
tea?
and tobacco were huge.
Yes.
No, remember one of the things that the Bostonians, what shot off the cannon for the American Revolution was the Boston Tea Party.
Yes.
They dumped tea into water in Boston Harbor, and
Yes.
out of that came the first, ringing of dissent against the then King George. People always say,
Tell
"Oh,"
our
and it's written
viewers,
that way,
tell
really.
our viewers why the tea was dumped in the ocean.
It was a symbol because British people drink tea, a
Yes.
spot of tea, will you? Might I have a spot of tea and a lump of sugar?
Yes.
They were not interested in that. We're like, we're Americans and we're going to stay Americans. We're always going to be Americans. Even though back then, to be honest, the American accent was much more of a British accent.
Yes.
You see that in New Yorkers and New Englanders, Massachusetts, Boston. Those are very British, watered down into American accents.
Yes.
You start seeing the country folk when you start talking country, when you start seeing the Southern folks,
Yes.
So my point here is the reason why those guys got together in Philadelphia was because they needed to essentially extricate themselves from the powers that were, number one, eating off of their profits taxation by the British Empire.
Yes.
You see? So when we look at politics, we always say, "Oh, it's for the right and the good of the people." Well, not always. So people benefit from what the wealthy are doing, you see? But at the end of the day, the interests of the wealthy oftentimes take precedence. And in so doing, sometimes, as Reagan said, trickle-down economy actually, or trickle-down policies and process typically end up helping the common people. And because the Constitution is this beautiful living document, I don't even think that the forefathers and the founders understood how amazing that document was. Because I think unbeknownst to them, because they were slave owners, they covered everyone.
Yeah.
They covered everyone. So the unique document, this beautiful living document, which is the Constitution of the United States, which Thurgood Marshall used in order to write Kenya's Bill of Rights and part of Kenya's Constitution, is a document that has been spread across the globe to provide civil liberties for peoples who are, of all nations. And the overarching beauty of America is, bring your tired, bring your poor, bring your hurdled masses.
Yes.
And that is the writing on the Statue of Liberty.
Yes.
So between 1900 and up to, I believe, 1945, the U.S. had a tacit campaign to bring immigrants into the United States to increase the population. And a lot of Europeans came and others, Asians, et cetera, et cetera. So when you look at the map of the United States, you see the railroads built in the West, mostly Chinese migrant workers. When you see cotton, when you see tobacco, when you see, what do you call it? Cotton, tobacco, and I think coffee, you see slave plantation and slaves being the core drivers of the American economy from 1619 all the way to 1865, during when the Emancipation Proclamation happened. So what you find is between all that are Frederick Douglass, you find Harriet Tubman, and key figures who worked with abolitionists to work on freeing the slaves. And even after the Declaration of Independence, moving into from when Lincoln signed the Declaration of Independence, you see Frederick Douglass right there over his shoulder, advising him and talking to him about the condition or the souls of Black folk.
Yes.
You follow me? So the political world, and this is where I think Africans should do a lot more research on the backgrounds. Now, we've talked about the modern families that build the CIA, NSA, and the American structure. And don't forget, during that period after World War II was where there was only the American Army at the time.
Yes.
Remember the war effort to support the Army, Rosie the Riveter, and everybody was working in factories. What people don't understand is canned foods and processed foods began at that period of time.
Yes.
You see? Where they needed to feed the American population, and it was just... And that has become what we now could criticize as processed foods in America.
Yes.
But part of it was driving the war effort. But what is so unique is during that period, especially after World War II, as you see the onset of CIA, you start seeing the Army now breaks down to the Army, Navy, Air Force, and then, of course, the Marines. Because air supremacy was important. Because we watched the German Luftwaffe kick our butts like crazy, Yes. Then you see the Navy, sea and Marine supremacy was important in order to monitor all the countries that essentially we were starting to, support, as you call it, from a policy perspective.
Yes.
And then you also see the ugly side. from the 1950s all the way to the 90s almost. You see CIA being involved in a lot of regime changes. And in the background, we're seeing powerful families and their money. Del Monte and all these organizations taking shape. Exxon, Shell. You see so it's always been government and corporate working their way. The Rockefellers and the Carnegies and what's the other family, Mom? Rocketies,
The
Carnegie, and I
Rothschild,
forget the other one.
Rothschild.
Rothschild. Well, not Rothschild, but Anderson Cooper's family. I
Okay.
forget. Yes, sorry, I'll remember in a minute.
Vanderbilt.
They're
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilts. Yeah, these are people who are leaving money and endowments to build the current educational structure. Why? Because they needed people to work in their factories. They needed people to be educated, both vocational skills training and basic rudimentary education, standard 1 through 8 or grade 1 through 8, in order to have a population of workers. So you see, in our modern world, what we try to do is, I want to get a job after college. Entrepreneurship is not really pushed. This is where I say Africans and Kenyans really, especially Kenyans, they really hit the mark, because the prerequisite for Kenyans is, I'm going to find a job, but I know how jobs are difficult because of tribalism or political corruption. You find more Kenyans are what? Entrepreneurs. Even if I'm going to work for Google, I'm still going to have my shamba where I'm doing my harvesting for my mangoes and my avocados. You see? So this is where Kenyans are winning. And slowly by slowly, you start seeing in the landscape of economics from a perspective of Africans and as a proportion of the African population, you're starting to see Kenyans growing. Why? Tech supremacy is coming up in Kenya with our techno cities, whether you're talking about Konza or you're talking about, what's the other one, Tatu City. You're starting to see that tech between Kenya. I think Kenya has now surpassed Nigeria in terms of tech capacity. And you're seeing agriculture, the push against GMOs and genetic, as we say, genetically modified organisms and foods, fruits and vegetables and things of that nature is a big deal in Kenya, because people are coming into Kenya eating organic foods, and they're seeing a difference in their body. Versus now our politicians are telling, oh, the best way to go is GMO. I don't think that's the right way to go. I think we need to be really careful.
They are being misled
But this is what,
by these Western,
yes,
these powerful Western people who want to dominate, the Kenyan food market by kicking off these organic farmers off the rail so they can take over and make money.
Indeed. And those organizations have big families behind them. We sometimes don't know Johnson and Johnson, that's a classic one. Post Foods was a big cereal. You and I love Marjorie Merriweather Post. She's the former owner of Mar-a-Lago and the Hillwood Estate. We're members to the Hillwood Estate. But if you look back at the powerhouses of the beginnings of the 1901 to, I want to say, 1960s, you see that they really had core involvement, really powerful influence in not only our economics and world economics, but in our politics. Now, you look at a guy like Trump and Harris to come to the modern 2024, 21st century. People always think that, oh, Shell Company gave Trump money, so Trump would essentially drill. That's a naive perspective. Shell may have given Trump 100 million, but they probably gave 10 million to Kamala. All these corporations give money to both sides. It all depends on how much they want to give and what level of influence, but they don't want to be caught so-called with their pants down. If a particular administration goes into the office, they want to essentially be able to say, but we contributed handsomely, didn't we? Now, this ties into this contribution oftentimes means that if I'm a wealthy billionaire, let's say, and I give Beldina 100 million for her presidency campaign, and I assist her in becoming president. When she becomes president, she's going to come to me and say, well, besides the federal appointments that require congressional vetting, maybe you'd like to be an ambassador in Kenya. And this is how our ambassadors come to us. Kenyans think, Or some of them are of the belief that ambassadors are appointed because they are this important. No, they've given a certain contribution to a campaign, and they literally can say of the African countries which country they want to go to, and some of the East Asian countries. But there's some that have to be political appointments, which are critical. The Britain, France, the European, NATO countries, those are very touchy. You just can't go picking those. But if you're a contributor and you give lots of good money to Trump or Harris, you should guarantee, whether you are a naturalized American or a natural born American, you can get an appointment to an ambassadorship. Only
I was going to say,
American born individuals can be president. Everyone else can be senator, except this is why you see a lot of Kenyans, Nigerians, and Indians who were born in foreign places taking a lot of political office.
I was going to say that over and above what the corporations do, associations also do that. You find an association of these groups of people, they put a certain amount of money to one candidate, and in the other party, they also put some money. Now, we may have to wind up. Give us some concluding points so that we can wind up. This is so very interesting. We will have a whole session next time only for the historical background.
No problem. One of the powerhouses in the foundations of the United States, and we talk about the founding fathers, just to give you a picture of how this country was based on power, influence, and economics. Freemasons, there are 2 million Freemasons in the United States today. I believe about 9 of the 56 signatories of the Declaration of Independence were Masons, okay? So they exist, they're there. Washington, D.C. is designed based on the Masonic symbols, Mormons, founded in 1830 by Joseph A. Smith, extremely powerful religious group, and the Jewish, which is a huge and powerful lobby. So we have to remember that oftentimes when elections are happening, these big groups, and of course the biggest one was the Quakers. Quakers were mostly related to the founders of the United States, and they founded the state of Pennsylvania, conveniently the very place where the Declaration of Independence was signed. So there's all these things that are relatable and are connected to the foundings of the U.S. A lot of times people think that elections are just elections and the person has money, like Trump has money, so therefore he's going to be president. He also has a pedigree, guys. John G. Trump. He's connected to the early CIA.
But has he used that?
That's what we don't know. I think one of the reasons why Trump was being accused of taking confidential documents, and if you recall, some of those confidential documents were noted as beyond super secret. So they may have had to do with some of these stories we hear about Tesla and John G. Trump, and some of the inventions that maybe Tesla had that John G. Trump was able to move forward with and really create an amazing storied reputation and a very, very well-respected career. We don't know, but I know that it is said that the U.S. government did utilize a lot of Tesla's inventions for some of the modern technologies we have now. So, at the end of the day, we cannot be naive. And just to wrap up, America is much more complicated than simply just Piga Hiokura, It's much more complicated than that.
Yes.
There's deep state and organizations and corporations that serve our interests. And what that's made me realize is, I'm just going to do my civic duty and vote. But beyond that, I'm not going to get stressed out about who's president, because the structure must stay in place, because if America falls, a lot of people are going to lose money.
So just one last question. How is Trump's advent into the presidency, how is that going to affect African nations, for example? Any idea?
That I'm just looking at it from my own personal perspective. He's not very well versed in Africa, but considering the changes and the fact that Africa has come into the fore, especially with the Chad, Guinea, Burkina Faso, and of course Senegal. Definitely, there may be some. To me, I see there may be some aggressive stance that this administration may take about the march towards independence for uranium yielding and gold yielding African countries. France is part of NATO. I worry that the thing that Trump guys tend to have is not a lot of core experience on the ground. Sometimes they're not as diplomatic, so I'm very concerned about that. I'm also thinking that with regards to Kenya itself, I worry that depending on Bill Gates' political position, you may find some increase in the GMO push. I worry about that. But I'm kind of relieved a little bit because when I think about it again, all of Trump's campaign, he kept saying these GMOs and he kept talking about that. He kept talking about the fact that the Democrats are pushing, these GMOs and all these things that are not healthy for us. And of course, he added the fake climate change, which he feels is fake. But I don't know where we're going to fall in all of this. But what Trump likes and what his cohorts like is money. And there's lots of money in Africa. So the human element that I've seen from the old Trump era is that sometimes the human component is not such a big part where we want peace, we want to be independent. He's probably going to want to work with African countries based on as long as it benefits the US. And I think we were going to see that with the Biden administration, Harris administration, but I think the Harris administration was going to kind of try to be more diplomatic. However, the fact that some issues are been ignored in terms of human rights and civil liberties in African countries speaks to the fact that we may still be in a space where who's our man in Kenya, who's our man in Nigeria, and who is our man in Burkina Faso, and who's our man in Guinea. So we need to be a bit more, we need to tune into our local diaspora citizens to write to their congressmen and push, like the Ethiopians pushed during the Tigray war, and get policies changed and get the respect. As long as we're discombobulated and disjointed and we're not working together, Africa policy as a whole will never be a priority for any administration.
That's a good point to close. And I'm saying this to say that point you mentioned about lobbying, African diaspora must understand they are the biggest lobbyists for their countries and for their continent, for the region. I think you had a taste of this at some point when Kenya was at war in 07, 08. You know the work we did in DC, the legwork, and not just us, but all the Kenyan diaspora made sure there was a difference was made and made sure that, they gave the correct information based on what they know as opposed to what the officialdom, the people who are on the ground, who have special interests, was sending to the US. And we are talking about the American officials who are misleading their own government. And until some of us went and intervened, things were not going the way they should have gone. But I'm thinking that the diaspora must understand that they are the ones who can make the difference.
I think you're understating your role. And as your previous role, in your previous position, what was so unique was the way in which you got your partners on the ground in working with some of your colleagues in Kenya, and you were able to essentially get hearings going, working with the Congressional Black Caucus and members of it in your capacity at the time. It was absolutely brilliant. And it really is an example of when Kenyans work together, when we have people in strategic places and are able to speak to what's happening on the ground, the US government acts accordingly, and in a fair, balanced, and consistent way. Those, we just are missing that. I think most people who are doing it out of selfish reasons, want to vie for presidency, want to get appointed by whatever local president is in Kenya. It's really short-sighted. There are ways in which all Ukraine, for instance, Ukrainians in the US who are American citizens lobbied heavily, and that led to Americans being involved in the Ukrainian war against Russia. Of course, it's Russia, so the US is going to be involved. But you need people on the ground to give pictures. So yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Thank you, dear viewers, for watching our program. Ms. Grace Ajode Jibril has just given us a historical background of that pertains to the US politics, and it has a very rich and intricate background. She has walked us through this. This is just a taste of it. We will bring her back so that she can go through it in a more lengthy way, but the little she gave us is food for thought. So thank you so much. Remember to subscribe to our channel. Remember to give us a thumbs up, and please share widely our program. It's educational. Thank you so much, and keep watching us. Bye-bye.